The following may contain offensive language, adult humor, and/or content that some viewers may find offensive. The views and opinions expressed by any one speaker does not explicitly or necessarily reflect or represent those of Mark Radulich or W2M Network. Please listen with caution, or don't listen at all.
Welcome to On Trial, starring Mark Radulich, also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Vincent K. McMahon presiding. That was for you, Pat. Tonight on the docket is John Carpenter's They Live, starring WWE late professional wrestler, the rowdy one, Roddy Piper. They Live is a 1988 American satirical science fiction action horror film written and directed by John Carpenter, based on the 1963 short story 8 O'Clock in the Morning by Ray Nelson. In addition to Roddy Piper, it stars Keith David and Meg Foster. The film follows an unnamed drifter who discovers through special sunglasses that the ruling class are aliens, concealing their appearance and manipulating people to consume, breed, and conform to the status quo via subliminal messages in mass media. The film was a minor success at the time of its release. It had a $3 million budget, made $13 million in North America, and initially received negative reviews from critics who lambasted its social commentary, writing, and acting. However, like Carpenter's other films, it later gained a cult following and experienced a significantly more favorable critical reception. It is now regarded by many as a largely underrated work. The film has also entered popular culture and notably had a lasting effect on street art, while its nearly 6-minute alley brawl between the protagonists has made appearances on an all-time list of the best fight scenes. And here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, but ladies and gentlemen, he is perpetually all out of bubblegum, Mr. Toxic Masculinity. Very nice. That is fantastic. Pat Mullin, my brother from another mother and boxing aficionado. How do you do, sir?
I'd like to thank my mom for getting me this shirt a couple months back as a birthday gift. So thank you, Mom, very much. I'm great, everybody. It's very rare that I get to hear an episode On Trial that I enjoy because usually it's either movies I hate that are being covered or somebody I hate to listen to covering them. So it's going to be fun because this one's my wheelhouse and I'm talking about it. And we're talking about 1988 seminal classic, They Live. Oh, I'm so excited for this. So many personal stories that come from this movie and my times around it. It's just, this is so good. I got that warm, fuzzy feeling inside that I really hope is just that and not something more sinister.
This is the 34th anniversary of the movie's appearance in North America in the box office. One of the reasons why we're doing it when we're doing it, it came out November 4th, as a matter of fact, 1988. And we planned this a year ago. I was like, Pat, whatever the anniversary for They Live is, and it turned out it was November. So I'm like, all right, I'm planning this for November of 2022. We discussed it in 2021. So it's finally here. Pat doesn't get to come on a lot. And when he does, it's for something that really tickles his fancy. So why is this?
I gotta say something, man.
Here we go.
We've been talking here, and I just want to say it's very rare you come upon a man of your word. And you said a year ago that we'd be doing this here show, and I just want to say in front of everybody, I thank you and I love you very much for it, man.
Love you too, Roddy. Listen, what's funny about that is when and I've said this now a couple of times over the last few months, but when I went through like the great schedule purge, when my wife pushed me kicking and screaming into polyamory, and I had to start like making time to date. I can talk about that openly now. Sorry, kicking and screaming.
Well, hence our preamble there before we started the show. Yeah. I thought that was just for me. Apparently not.
No, I'm open about it now. Speaking of open, when we agreed mutually to to enter into this relationship dynamic, one of the things was, even before that, it was I was doing this way too much. I was like up like 7 days a week at one point. And then it was like, well, okay, I got to make time to meet new people and go out and do things and make time for my wife and kids and everything else. So over the summer, I had cut down to I had cut a lot of shows, a lot of stuff I promised I would do with people. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Gave away an entire show to Alexis Hana, like TV Party. I'm done with television. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch 10 hours of television a week.
Haven't seen the ratings yet on that one there, son.
Leave her alone, you bully. But this was one of the few that made the cut, is the point. This one I was like, no, I don't cut Pat's They Live show. First of all, I think Pat would fly down to Florida and punch me in the face if I did. Like, what the fuck, man?
Put the glasses on.
Yeah, really, just put the glasses on. I don't know why I'm doing this, Pat. Just put them on. I would never have cut this show. I've never seen They Live. I watched They Live for the first time. Yeah, I watched They Live for the first time in preparation for this show. It was one of those ones where I knew it was a Roddy Piper thing. I knew it was like his biggest movie to date at the time. But for whatever reason, I was like, I'm just not interested.
But even then, I'm just shocked because I remember this at least up until around like 92, 93 being a fixture on like the Channel 11, Saturday night movie or Sunday afternoon movie a lot of the time. Like, and we've talked about how these are movies we grew up on in the, in the New York area. You had these movies pretty regularly on, the Channel 11, Channel 2, et cetera. Or if you were, one of the elite class and you had HBO or Cinemax or Showtime, you would see a lot on one of those.
For whatever reason, I was... the iconic imagery of Roddy Piper, the drifter, the unnamed drifter, walking around in like the flannel shirt with the shotgun. That line, I have come here to kick ass and shoot bubblegum, and I am all out of bubblegum. That is something he said as a wrestler. That had to have either been improvised or like a script suggestion. There's no way that independently was written into this movie without Roddy Piper's suggestion.
He had written down a lot of his best promo stuff after he had used it and rewatched like the tapes back of stuff.
Right.
And he had this, as told by John Carpenter, Roddy had this green notebook of a lot of these phrases and quips he would use. And Carpenter happened to be, thumbing through it to get an idea of Roddy and who he was and what his work style is. And he saw that line and he was like, man, I got to figure out a way to get him to use this line in this movie because it's too good.
So the iconic imagery, never mind like the iconic alien imagery that is very reminiscent of something like Mars Attacks. It definitely has that like 1950s alien feel to it, which is one of the great things about this movie. But the iconic Roddy Piper walking into the bank with the shotgun saying, I have come here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I am all out of bubblegum, and lighting that motherfucker up. Like, I remember that. If I never saw the movie, but I remember that scene because that clip would get used in commercials and stuff. Like that was the hook to get people to watch this movie, and it's very effective.
That's like knowing the line, I'll be back from Terminator, and having never seen Terminator, but everybody knows the line and what it's
everybody
from.
Knows that, right. And yeah, and they all know it's Terminator. They know it's Schwarzenegger. If they know nothing else about that movie.
Exactly.
So what do you know about the production for this thing? What do you know about the history of it?
So Carpenter always liked to, he was an avid reader. He read a lot of like Ray Bradbury, stuff like that. And he'd always wanted to do, movies based around a lot of that kind of writing and showmanship type authoring. Hence like Assault on Precinct 13. That Carpenter had done that really was kind of his like, hello, I'm here, everybody, before he got to Halloween. And he kind of conceived of this movie in a very short window of time, partly based on, like you mentioned, there's a short story, 8 o'clock in the morning by Ray Nelson, about a guy who figures out he's been hypnotized and is in his trance and then tries to wake everybody up out of it. But unfortunately it's the stroke of 8 o'clock. It's a whole thing. Read the story. But he had that, and he was looking at the world and really kind of from that left-wing filmmaker school. It was very anti-capitalist, from the generation Carpenter was, where there was the anti-Vietnam movement, and very anti-Reagan, and Reagan's staunch, family values, et cetera type stuff. So what he saw at the same time was kind of what a lot of people felt was runaway capitalism, where there was no regulation on capitalist practices. And what it did was result in either there being an extremely wealthy class and an extremely poor class and no middle class in between type thing.
Right.
And he kind of wrote a lot of this in response to what he felt was the movement towards that. I think he openly referred to it, and people who derided the Reagan administration derided it as the Reagan Revolution.
Right.
You know, and that's a whole other podcast you do on another day for another debate about
Sure.
that. I'll keep it to that. But it evolved a lot out of Carpenter's own personal feelings on that, how it mixes in with, the short story influence that he talked about. And he decided, because he had a lot of stroke at this point, because even though his movies were more cult hits, he could do them for low budgets and achieve big results, kind of almost like Roger Corman. So this one was conceived.
We were talking about this on Tuesday. Like, that's sort of the model for horror in general. Whereas you shoot it on a shoestring, and if it hits, it usually hits big and it's monster profit.
Yeah, because John had also had some films that didn't hit that were made for a higher budget. But you look at the stuff where John had to really stretch his money, and that's when you got Escape from New York, which was very positively received. Halloween.
I was gonna say there's a lot of John Carpenter's movies that are monumental in terms of like influence on film culture. Escape from New York inspired 1,000 different lookalikes. We talked about this, I think, the last time you and I talked.
We did.
Was
Hell Comes to Frogtown. It's
yeah, another Roddy Piper movie. But Escape from New York inspired an entire generation of lookalikes, and then obviously Halloween is a bellwether for the horror genre.
Yeah, and so this is part of a 2-picture deal that Carpenter had gotten with Universal after he had done Big Trouble in Little China in 1986. So the first movie he did under this deal was Prince of Darkness, which even among Carpenter fans, it's very divisive. There's people who love Prince of Darkness and love the concept behind it. There's people who think the execution is sloppy and it's not a well-balanced film. I tend to fall more into that camp. But because he had the secondary film to do on this, and he'd basically written a lot of this while making Prince of Darkness, and kind of came to the conclusion in late 1987 how he wanted to shoot this and what he wanted to do. And Carpenter had met Piper about a year or so earlier at WrestleMania 3, which was in Pontiac, Michigan, the outskirts of Detroit. And Carpenter liked Roddy's quality. Roddy had done 2 films that year that were waiting for release, so he'd done some acting. And Carpenter kind of looked at this guy where I think his words exactly were, Roddy's face has life written all over it versus actors.
Yeah.
And if you know Roddy's life, Roddy had a life to that point. And so he always envisioned something he could try to do with Piper as this very different type of lead. And that's when all the pieces started falling together into this to make this character, which is partially based around Roddy. We lost Mark momentarily, but this character based around Roddy and this narrative that Carpenter wanted to tell. And since he had the
didn't he start wrestling in the Pacific Northwest in at 14 or something like that?
Roddy turned professional as a wrestler at 16 in Winnipeg, Canada for $25 Canadian, and then was touring the United States in Kansas City immediately after. And before that, he was a teenage runaway living on the streets and a lot of other stuff. And Roddy's had a life. But because Carpenter had already done Prince of Darkness and he had this secondary film, he envisioned a lot of this while doing that. He had his meeting with Roddy at WrestleMania 3 and wanted to do something with him, and felt like because he had this deal locked in for this picture already, he could do it. And that's how a lot of these pieces came to be.
All right, so let's talk about what happens in this movie. A homeless drifter credited as Nada comes to Los Angeles in search of a job. While out in the streets, he sees a street preacher warning that they have recruited the rich and powerful to control humanity. Nada finds employment at a construction site and is befriended by the coworker Frank, who invites him to live in a shantytown soup kitchen led by a man named Gilbert. That night, a hacker takes over a television broadcast claiming that scientists have discovered signals that are enslaving the population and keeping them in a dreamlike state, and that the only way to stop it is to shut off the signal at its source. Those watching the broadcast complain of headaches. Nada secretly follows Gilbert and the preacher into a nearby church and discovers them meeting with a group that includes the hacker. He sees scientific equipment and cardboard boxes inside. Nada is discovered by the blind preacher and escapes. The shantytown and church are both destroyed in a police raid in the same night, and the hacker and preacher are beaten by the riot police. The following day, Nada retrieves one of the boxes from the church and takes a pair of sunglasses from it, hiding the rest in a trash can. Nada discovers that the sunglasses make the world appear monochrome, but also reveal subliminal messages in the media to consume, reproduce, and conform. The glasses also reveal that many people are actually aliens with skull-like faces. When Nada mocks an alien woman at a supermarket, she alerts other aliens via a wristwatch-like device. Nada leaves, but is confronted by 2 alien police officers. He kills them and steals their weapons. Nada enters a bank where he sees that several of the employees and customers are aliens. He kills several aliens with a shotgun and escapes, taking Cable 54 employee Holly Thompson hostage. At Holly's home, Nada tries to get her to try on the glasses, but she knocks him out of the window and down a hill and calls the police. The next day, Nada returns to the alleyway and retrieves the sunglasses from a garbage truck before Frank meets Nada to give him his paycheck. Nada tries to get Frank to put on the glasses, but Frank thinks Nada is a murderer and wants nothing to do with him. Frank and Nada get into a long and violent brawl. Yep, the infamous 6-minute brawl. After which, Frank is too tired to prevent Nada from putting on the sunglasses on him. After seeing the aliens in the flying saucer, Frank goes into hiding with Nada. Frank and Nada run into movement at the meeting. They are given contact lenses to replace the sunglasses and learn that the aliens are using global warming to make Earth more like their own planet and are depleting the Earth's resources for their own gain. They also learn that aliens have been bribing humans to become collaborators, promoting them to positions of power. Holly arrives at the meeting, apologizing to Nada. Then the meeting is raided by the police, and the vast majority of those present are killed, with the survivors, including Frank, Nada, and Holly, scattering. Nada and Frank are cornered in an alley, but they accidentally activate an alien wristwatch, opening a portal through which they escape. The portal takes them to the alien spaceport, where they discover a meeting of aliens and human collaborators celebrating the elimination of the terrorists. They are approached by a former drifter, briefly met in the shantytown, now a collaborator, who gives them a tour of the facility. He leads them to the basement of Cable 54, the source of the signal, which is protected by armed guards. Nada and Frank find Holly and fight their way to the transmitter on the roof, but Holly kills Frank, revealing that she too is a human collaborator. Nada kills Holly and destroys the transmitter and is fatally wounded by aliens in a helicopter. Nada gives the aliens the middle finger as he dies.
Yeah, he does.
With the transmitter destroyed, humans all over the world are free from their dreamlike state and discover the aliens hiding amongst them. So, okay, this is On Trial, where we debate the merits of the film. Someone takes the positive and someone takes the negative. I don't want to get beaten up by Pat, so I don't want to be too hard on this movie. But it's not that I don't like it. And I do think thematically, one of the things that was said in our group chat was the themes of this movie are as relevant today as they were back in 1988. That is very true. This is a timeless movie. This is a movie that I could absolutely show in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I think I think it won't have aged. You know, obviously special effects being what they are, that'd be one thing. But I think in terms of what's presented on screen, I think is timeless. And certainly the discussion that this engenders is also. Pacing, there's some issues here. This movie is approximately an hour and a half. It does not feel an hour and a half. It feels longer. The first, 40 minutes, I feel like 30 to 40 minutes. There's a lot of establishing is utterly unnecessary. It's important to build the world of the shantytown and the homeless, but it doesn't take as long as they do. It takes forever to get here's what we want in They Live. We want Roddy Piper to shoot aliens. We need to see the homeless. We need to see the disparate classes, the very, very rich and the very, very poor. We need to meet our drifter. We need to meet Frank. We need to have him find the glasses, and we need him to kill his first alien. That needs to happen quickly, and it does not. It takes forever. There's so much time just establishing like the homeless shantytown. It takes forever to get to that bank scene. That bank scene's the best part of the movie, and it takes forever to get there. And then after that, look, I love Roddy Piper, and far be it for me to disparage the good goddamn name of Roddy Piper. Yes, he looks the part, and yes, he has the physical presence, and he has obviously that professional wrestling charisma that most actors wish they had. Also, not a good actor. He's just not. He's really struggling with this. Keith David is doing his level best to drag him along, but there are some times, and he's not helped by the other woman in this picture. Oh God, what is her name?
Meg Foster.
Meg Foster. I don't know where they dug her up, but she's not great either. And I don't know if she was just struggling with the material or what, but their scene in her apartment is fucking awful, dude. Like he is acting a part. He is acting across a fucking mannequin crossed with a salmon. Like, I don't know what was going on with her, but she looked.
I think she left it all. I think she left it all in Masters of the Universe as Evelyn.
That's where she's from. Well, that tells me a lot. Oi, fucking vey, dude. Like she's just awful. And I mean, she's okay later on in the movie, but like, there's supposed to be some sexual chemistry between her and Roddy Piper. There's none. I've seen more sexual chemistry between two penguins fucking. Like, it's bad, man. Her line delivery, it's like.
Do you feel like they not necessarily audio, but do you feel like they kind of like audio sweetened or deepened her voice a little bit with these lines?
I was thinking, like, did they shoot her in a different fucking room than Roddy Piper? Like,
the acoustics of her voice?
Yeah, I don't know.
I killed you.
Dude, first of all, like, I expected her in the middle of her dialogue with Roddy Piper to start going, a wee moet in the junk. You know, like, it was so deep. Like, what is happening here? We finally we get past that. We get past the bank. Look, I am not going to sit here and tell you a 6-minute fight scene is overkill, but I absolutely can understand them wanting to leave that in there. I want to see the fight between the editor and John Carpenter, because someone had to have told John Carpenter it is not necessary to do 6 minutes of this.
Okay, but now two things, right?
Mm-hmm.
One, you have already derided the acting ability of Roderick George Toombs.
Sure.
But there's something he excels at that he was noticed for prior to this.
Maybe space it out then. Maybe not do it all in 6 minutes.
Okay, but at the same time, if this movie is not known for kick-ass and chew bubblegum, what is this movie known for?
I hear you. And I don't have, like, I think if somebody were to remake this movie, right? This obviously, like, gets cribbed by movies like Independence Day, almost, you know, down to like, oh, they're terraforming the planet, like that kind of a thing. There's a lot here that I think you can work with and focus on. Maybe take less of the focus off of him and put a little bit more of it on the aliens and kind of show what's going on with the aliens. There's a lot of like.
Does Kanye West play the John Nada role?
No, we're gonna get James Franco, but James Franco playing multiple parts. He plays Roddy Piper's part, he plays Keith David's part, and he plays Meg Foster's part.
He might do well as Meg Foster.
He might. I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of focus on Roddy Piper and what he's doing, and maybe take some of that away when you remake this and focus a little bit more on the aliens. Space some of the fighting out. Like, I think you can have a good fight scene. I just don't think it needed to be fucking 6 minutes long. Lastly, and then I'll let you come to this film's defense and put me in my place. It's just like there's a discussion to be had about what this movie is talking about. I wish it had spent a little bit more time on that. I wish there's a lot of Roddy Piper trying to convince people to put the glasses on, but not a lot of discussion about how we got to a place where there are human collaborators with these aliens that are willing to sell out their species and the planet for for fun and profit. Maybe discuss within the movie why people would do that kind of a thing, why they would sell each other out for short-term gain. The movie doesn't really deal with it. It's just sort of like it's mad that kind of mentality exists, and it addresses it, but only in that we're mad that it exists in the first place, and then doesn't really deal with anything else.
Wait. Are you saying that there are people who are mad that other more successful people have more money than them and they don't know how they got it, but damn it, they shouldn't have it?
I am absolutely saying there are people that are mad that there are other people in this world that are not willing to do the right thing, that are do the absolute wrong thing, but the wrong thing produces a short-term gain for those individuals.
One person's wrong is another person's cha-ching.
Yep, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
That's right. Take that, Christopher Radulich, and you.
Oh, you saw his latest TikTok, did you?
Indeed, I did.
Wait, I thought you were. You saw it on Instagram.
Yes, I did.
Okay. No like, no heart.
No, I don't usually harder like the ramblings of crazy madmen, other than if their last name is Piper.
Fantastic. Come to this movie's defense.
Okay, so there's a lot of this movie, kind of like a lot of other of Carpenter's movies, that it's aged so well and better than when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in the 1980s in the United States, you had very divisive political attitudes towards the era. There were very pro-Reagan people who were behind what he was doing and felt, a lot of this groundswell of patriotism based around his campaign and what it focused on. And there were people who thought Reagan was this evil dictator and out to get people's money and oppress people and create a super wealthy class. And so you're talking about attitudes that are even more apparent now with how candidates are marketed and promoted by their respective parties, particularly the major two parties, the Democrats and Republicans, where there is no middle ground anymore between the left and the right. You're either very much one, very much the other, or a libertarian and think everybody is out to get somebody. And it's apparent now. And if you watch this film, regardless of what side of the fence you sit on, you can see either way this being relatable to that part of it, where, there are right-wing people who feel that the government is inherently corrupt and selling out their needs and values and what things should be done a certain way are in order to gain financially. And at the same time, right-wingers feel that Democrats have always had an agenda to oppress minorities by trying to gain their trust and tell them they're looking out for them. And then what they secretly do is just sell out on them and take from them and exploit them. On the left side of things, you believe that government is a big agenda of control for the wealthy in order to sustain their current hold on the world's wealth and their status and what they seek to gain, and feel that they're keeping people oppressed that are already in that scenario and vice versa. If either way of those points or schools of thought, and you watch this movie, you can relate either one to your viewpoint. That's kind of the subtle brilliance of it that I don't even think Carpenter knew he was doing at the time, because Carpenter was very left-wing and very anti-Reagan. But especially now with more of what we know in the future, it's relatable to both sides on a very, very easy to see level. The glasses reveal the transparency in a lot of ways.
Sure. That's what I'm saying. Like, this. I'm usually like the anti-remake guy, but this is one where I would love to see someone's take on this with a bigger budget, some name actors, and a real focus on the themes.
I would be very, very, very nitpicky about it no matter what, because of how much I love this one. But it's something worth revisiting. Of all the trash we've seen remade, this would be something that could be very workable and doable with a fresher take on it, and more material to work with, and a beta version to see where the flaws of the film are. I want
to see Aaron Sorkin's They Live.
Aaron Sorkin's.
Could you imagine?
I'm so afraid of that, but so
starring the entire cast of The Newsroom.
I'm out, everybody. No, but I think that's a huge part of what makes this film still so relevant at why it's become such a bigger cult favorite over the years. And I think that's its biggest selling point, part one. Part two, for as lackadaisical and non-existent as any chemistry of any kind was between Roddy and Meg Foster, I think Roddy and Keith David play off each other really well, where it's very much in a lot of ways like a wrestling match where you have somebody who has a lot of charisma about them, but doesn't have the tools to do the job and be a good carpenter in that instance and needs the carpenter to help them build. In this instance,
Keith David gives the best performance of anyone in this movie.
Yeah, and Carpenter loved working with him on The Thing, which is why he wanted to get him in something else. And this was the best opportunity he saw. And it got to feature Keith in a prominent role that he hadn't really had the likes of before, where he's essentially a co-lead of this movie. His character has the second most screen time of anybody in it. And I think he gets the chance to shine by doing what he does with Roddy. He still comes off as a professional actor versus a wrestler dabbling in acting, which is how Roddy is seen. And he gets a lot of credibility for his parts with Roddy, with the physicality, with the believability in that instance. Again, the 6-minute alley fight. Some people say, boo. I say, yeah, this is amazing. That was as great a cinematic fight as you'll ever see because a lot of it was very gritty and they're really working each other over. And there's a lot of times in that fight rehearsal that they slipped and accidentally made some contact.
Objection, Your Honor. No one is saying it's not a great fight. It's way too long. You can have that same impact, that same grittiness, that same potatoing of each other, and you can do it in 3 minutes.
I ask you this. Would you cut that fight down to 2.5 to 3 minutes in order to get more interplay from Roddy and Meg Foster?
Absolutely not.
All right. Thank you, sir. No further questions. but you know, it's a very smart gimmick to get Roddy's selling point to people in the movie, which is Roddy's physicality and ability to tell a story with his body in this fight, like he does with Keith David. And shout out to Keith David for holding up his end of this too, man.
He was there for it.
And again, a lot of movie fights, especially in Carpenter's last few movies, like, you know, Big Trouble in Little China rocks. It's amazing.
Oh, it's great.
But not the most realistic of fight scenes with flying ancient ninjas and mummies and wildebeest hanging onto Kurt Russell's truck at the end of the movie and all that stuff. This one, we had a gritty street fight where they start rolling around and kneeing each other in the balls repeatedly like you would. And, you know, they even make you laugh during it where Frank accidentally breaks his car window and you see Roddy kind of, as he does it, oh, I'm sorry, man. And they just start rolling into it again.
I think the other one where he like goes off on the handshake, just knees him right in the nuts.
I told you I didn't want to be involved. Boom. So I think those guys had pretty good chemistry together, both in a physical sense from the fight, but I also think they played well off of each other. I think for as even though Roddy had done 3 films to this point, 2 of them in the last year, he's still very new at this, and he's been put into a lead role already twice. Once in our previous entry in, you know, Hell Comes to Frogtown, and another that's not really a big stretch of his acting ability either in Body Slam, where he plays a traveling professional wrestler. So this is Roddy's first real challenge as an actor,
right?
And I don't think he necessarily gives the best performance. You know, this isn't Stallone locking into Rocky Balboa and really channeling something and finding lightning in a bottle. I think he's good enough, and I think for what they want him to be, it works, because also you don't want to have an immediately identifiable presence as such as an actor with this character. If you bring this guy in, and let's say Kurt Russell's playing John Nada, you've kind of already made your mind up about a lot of things in this, right?
You know, it's funny. It's funny you bring up Kurt Russell because I just watched him in Death Proof earlier today.
Is it my scar?
And I was actually, and then you bring up Big Trouble in Little China. Kurt Russell, I think, brings a different presence to this role. I'm not entirely sure it brings the right presence because I actually think Roddy Piper has, because he's not a strong actor and they don't give him as much dialogue, and you know, there's a lot of him using his physical presence in every scene versus him having to act. I actually think works for that character. That character is supposed to be almost an avatar that you can project yourself into.
Yes.
There's a reason why he's a no-name drifter.
Yes.
That all works, and I think you want
even
more
the
of a
scripted
subtle
name,
presence.
nada. You're nothing.
Right. I think I think Roddy Piper actually worked really, really well in the role. Like, my issues with Piper is I have to call out that he's not a good actor in this, but I'm okay with it. I think it actually serves the part fairly well. Again, my issues with this movie are not Keith David or not Roddy Piper. Meg Foster sucks. And there's some pacing issues and some structure issues here and there. But I think for the most part, there's sound bones to this movie. I think another pass through editing is probably like my biggest, like, it needed another pass through editing before the final cut got printed.
And Carpenter is always one of those guys who's notorious on doing a lot of the editing himself.
Yeah,
and,
so a lot of his babies get capped, and this has been my issue this whole year with, Robert and I have talked about how the lack of collaboration in film now is leading to a lot of vanity projects and a lot of babies being left on screen that didn't need to be there.
Right. And like, there's part of it where he writes this part where Roddy and Keith David are in the hotel room, and Roddy kind of talks about his past a little bit and how, his dad held a razor to him and he's saying, "Daddy, please, why?" And it's supposed to be this big emotional moment that really strips this guy down, as he's not some larger than life, Arnold or Sly action hero. He's a regular guy caught up in something way over his head, and he's just a person and he's breaking down and can't handle shit. And it's just, Roddy doesn't have the ability yet at this point in time as an actor to really seem vulnerable like that. And it doesn't help that he is legitimately 6'2" and probably at this time weighs around like 220, 225 of pretty solid muscle. And he wears pants that are tighter than, some of Prince's on stage outfits. But it's almost kind of like they wanted a vibe somewhere between Kurt Russell's cool from like a Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
And Charles Bronson's kind of grim as Paul Kersey from Death Wish. And he never really finds the balance for it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure John Carpenter. I'm not even sure John Carpenter knew what he was looking for, because I can see there being an argument for, well, we brought this wrestler in, these louder than life wrestlers, these Hulk Hogan types. That's what we want him to be. But then you wrote him a character that's not what that should be. That character should be blending, not being explosive or sucking the air out of the room, getting attention. You want him to be nondescript. And I could see where Piper was like struggling with, like, I don't understand. This character is one way, but you're directing me another way.
Yeah, it almost kind of seems like Carpenter had this idea for this character in mind, but the more he knew and got to know Roddy, he decides to make the character Roddy. Whether that's based on him just liking Roddy's background, feeling Roddy's better suited to carry that out than he is to actually have to act out this part as it's written.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be, he loses balance there. I agree. The pacing, yes, it's definitely got some issues where the general script writing process is every 10 minutes of time you want an action beat, something to move the story along.
Right.
The first 40 minutes, you're lacking that heavily.
Yep.
But the climax as it's written, that last half hour, 40 minutes is very much action beats every 6-7 minutes to try to make up for that.
Right. But
not the least of which is the 6-minute alley fight.
Right. But again, that goes to pacing. It's kind of like being on a roller coaster where the whole thing is it's like a 3 or 4 minute coaster, and 3 minutes, 30 seconds is the buildup. The last 30 seconds, you're down and going through a loop-de-loop. And you're like, wait, that's it? We're done here?
Yeah, it's definitely uneven in that respect.
Yeah.
And as hard as, for somebody watching it specifically, I want to see Roddy shoot aliens. It's definitely going to be a pacing issue for you. Like, I loved this movie as a kid because it was Roddy Piper in a real movie. Like, this is something that didn't happen.
Yeah. And look, let me ask you a question. If you ever watched it on like VHS, did you fast forward immediately to the bank scene and start watching it from there?
Of course, because that's what you want to see. And I think Carpenter's biggest flaw in this is overestimating the ability of any audience to stay looped in without these action scenes to keep them going. So I'll agree that, like, it's definitely got its issues on that. But do I think it makes up for it on the back end of things? I do think the back end is enough to do that. You know, a 6-year-old kid's not going to have the biggest attention span for anything, let alone,
Right.
30 to 40 minutes of character build and scene setting
I
to
you
get
know
to
I
this
wa-
part.
I watch a lot of movies with my kids, and I make them I make them watch, I think, the stuff that has cultural value to it. Like, oh, watch this movie, it was important to
Dude,
film. Well,
I had my 9-year-old nephew watch Predator, and he thought it sucked and couldn't get through the first 25 minutes of it.
yeah, they don't make kids like they used to. But I couldn't show them. I would have to start it at the bank scene, because no kid sitting through that 40 minutes of them just you getting associated with the homeless people. Like, I see the value in it, but here's the thing: you only need 10 minutes. I said this before. You only need 10 minutes to get to know the homeless before you run them over with tractors, and then and now Roddy's got something to fight for. Like, it. I think that in constructing the script for this, you're right. I think they assume people's attention span would be kept long enough, and and wait. And like I said, as a kid, you're just so excited by the time you get to the bank scene, you don't really care about anything else. You're not really thinking about it critically. But as I watched this as a film person, I was like, wow, like they overestimated the audience's ability to stay invested, because by the time I got to the bank scene, I was like, how much longer is this movie?
Well, that's the funny part too, is like again, it used to air a lot when I was a kid, and you'd always want to pick it up right at the bank scene where all of a sudden, shit's real.
Yeah.
And or at the very least when he first finds the glasses and figures
Right.
out what they do. But then, as in maybe you catch it years later. Like, I remember not seeing this movie from the time I was about like 7 until I was a junior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a long period of time and maturation over that point in time. And I remember it was the night before I was taking the SATs, and they were airing it on AMC.
Mm-hmm.
And suffice to say, I grew up very poor. I needed a pretty high SAT score to get a scholarship to go to college, etc. So I was playing with my fate a little bit, because I decided it was more important to see this movie that I hadn't seen in a long time and stay up till 2 a.m. to watch it. And, take a test at 7 the next day, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, so I remember not seeing it, and then I remember like being hyped up, like, oh my gosh, they're playing it, because this was a hard movie to find for a long time. It was out of print in VHS. There was no DVD. You had to go on eBay to try to find like pirated copies of it that would cost you like $90, which is crazy. But then I saw it again for the first time, and I saw it was blocked for 2.5 hours on AMC, and that's a long time. And I'm like, I don't remember that movie being this long.
Right.
And then again, you get to the initial stages where they're introducing him at, speaking to the job agency and just walking through town, seeing these sites. And, when he makes it to the shanty town and all this stuff, kick him out of the construction site for sleeping there. And you're like, there's a lot I don't remember about this. I don't remember it taking this long to chew bubblegum and kick ass. Now, again, once you start chewing bubblegum and kicking ass, it's, we're on. This rocks. Okay. And, every 5 minutes there's something new. Boom, 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 boom. But, again, I think Carpenter, that's one of his large hallmarks, because even in other movies where he has a little more coherency and filling in the plot, like, again, we'll reference Escape from New York. There's a lot of introduction there with what Snake is, the deal that he's made to do this and go behind the lines. And
yeah, there's some world building that has to take place with Escape from New York. I don't know this one needed as much world building. Or if you're going to do that kind of world building and you're going to take some time, let's leave the pacing as it is. Let's leave the structure as it is. We needed to know more about the aliens. The problem, I think one of the problems with this movie is that when he puts the glasses on, it's like, oh my God, the big reveal. Maybe don't do it that way then, because you already know going into this movie going into this movie, Roddy Piper, this is about Roddy Piper shooting aliens. They're aliens. There's no surprise here. Maybe introduce the aliens a little bit sooner and what their nefarious plot is. Like most action movies, most movies involving a villain of sorts, an antagonist, what the antagonist's plan is in the first act. You don't get that until like midway through act 2 in this one.
Yeah. But I also, again, I don't think that's necessarily just this film for John Carpenter. I think it's in his less critically loved movies, This is a big criticism that we see a lot of the time. What is it? Ghost from Mars was like the last like real big movie he did, and that
Mhm.
was a big criticism of Ghosts of Mars. The other one that I think was actually it's a great concept, but it's executed kind of meh. In the Mouth of Madness. I don't know if you remember that one. Again, lots of world building through the majority of John's career. The only movies we really don't get a ton of world building that he's done are Halloween and The Thing, to be
Mhm.
honest. Because The Thing, you're just in a remote Arctic base. Boom, there you go.
I'm gonna throw two movies at you that I think have like a perfect structure to them: Ghostbusters and Superman 3. So Superman 3, okay, we meet Gus at the beginning, and and he's turned down at a job, and then so we know that when the next time we see him, he's down on his luck. He is ripe for being taken advantage of by the big villain of the movie. And after we meet Gus, it goes into the credit scene where it's the big Rube Goldbar beginning, where things are falling and people are going into manholes and there's paint everywhere. The whole comedic beginning of Superman 3. Ghostbusters, very similar. You have what as the movie opens, you meet the librarian and the librarian ghost and all of that, and then we're right into meeting our heroes. And when they're introduced as schlubs, and they're almost immediately fired and having to very quickly figure out what their next plan is going to be after they go check out the library.
So while you're trying to tell all aspiring young musicians out there that they should listen to "She Loves You" by the Beatles and think that that's the ultimate song structure, there's some of us out there who are listening to Brian Wilson's arrangements and telling you that there's not just one way to do something. There's not just one right way. Okay, Daniel LaRusso?
Okay, I'm not saying there's only one white there. If it ain't white, it ain't right. Right way to do something. I'm just saying there are some tried and true methods that when you're dealing with something that might be a little unwieldy, that's very thematic in nature, maybe some of the tried and true structures would be better off.
Maybe, but again, you're talking about John Carpenter, and Carpenter has a very particular style of how he does things. And again, like I'm saying, parts of these stories that he's come through and developed and directed, some of them he didn't really go through a ton of world building, but it's very rare. And
Right.
ironically enough, they're arguably his probably two most critically successful works in the original Halloween and The Thing, where he does a lot of world building and structure, where he creates these elaborate scenarios like in They Live, in Escape from New York, Assault on Precinct 13. You look at those, and yes, it's a lot of structure and setup. I think that this isn't as well executed as Escape from New York.
You know what another movie that does a lot of world building really, really well, but does it in a way that it keeps you engaged and people could take a lesson from? First Harry Potter movie.
I can't speak to that because I haven't seen any of them. So
okay. So
I'm gonna have to take your word for it.
A lot of the first Harry Potter is just setting up what the school is and how it works and how it operates. But within that, there's stuff happening. There's a lot going on. It's a little frenetic.
Right.
So if you're watching, like any one of the Marvel movies,
well, I was even going to say that even in this, there's a lot of stuff that could be going on as you get these follow throughs with following, the character of John Nada around, and you don't. You just get that that right. Slow score, and Roddy just kind of walking or whatever. And meanwhile, while this whole capitalism thing is going on with the aliens or whatever you want to call it, you could be cutting to things of, seeing people signing over, deeds to houses and plants being shut down and things of that nature to really speed up the world building, or at least paint the narrative of what's really going around. You intersperse that with scenes of, people sleeping outside or in boxes, etc. I think that could be done a little better. But also, when you're thinking of, again, the conception time of this movie, Carpenter making it because he knew he could and wouldn't have much in the way of interference because of the deal he had locked in with Universal at the time for distribution. It's very much, you got to understand, this is Carpenter doing things Carpenter wants to do with nobody to stop him. And anytime you have a movie like that where you're allowed to be self-indulgent, a lot of people are. And despite that, I think somebody just tipped him off to the second half and was like, John, this is a tale of two movies. You have a disparate, boring foreign film following a protagonist without a narrative for the first 40 minutes.
Mhm.
And in the second 40 minutes, you've got just a straight up actioner of blowing stuff up. You got to kind of make this pastiche a little better. And Carpenter either just overestimated what his audience was going to relate to in this and understand, didn't understand maybe who he was marketing to. Because
Yeah.
if one of your selling points for this is Roddy Piper, his audience is not necessarily going to latch on to what you're trying to paint to begin with. And even if you're appealing to your own fans, again, you're taking hallmarks of a lot of things they've kind of called you out on and still putting them in and trying to win them over your way. And it's something Carpenter never got away from. I think this is better executed than a lot of the stuff he does later, like in The Mouth of Madness, Ghosts of Mars, his very bad Village of the Damned remake. I don't know if you saw that with Christopher Reeve.
No, I have not.
Okay, it's Christopher Reeve and Kirstie Alley, but it's Village of the Damned. You know, the kids with the platinum hair and everything.
Okay.
And in that one, as much as he tries to set, it's a narrative thing with Carpenter where he's not great at starting that and doesn't know where to begin, kind of, and go. He knows where he has to go, but he has trouble getting there. And it's something he never overcomes really in his writing and directing. But at least with this, the painting of the world they're trying to create isn't super out of left field until you see.
They're not trying to create fucking Asgard.
Yeah, they're you're talking about a country that's seen a Great Depression and has people who lived through that still going to the movies and seeing these pictures and understanding what potential that could come from, or a lot of people from parts of Eastern Europe after World War II when it had collapsed. And
I mean, let's not forget the recent history of poverty that was just in the 70s. The coming out of the Vietnam War, and the Great Malaise. It's the whole thing that got Reagan elected in the first place. Was during the Carter years, there was a lot of poverty. Like the Family Guy through the years, where they show like the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and like the opening to Family Guy of the 70s. Look, it's like New York City, like trash, like blowing in the breeze, and homeless in the street and all of that, and it's very sad music. It's because it's what the country was dealing with. So it's like, in 1988. Deep poverty was not something people were like utterly unfamiliar with. You at least saw it on the news.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to ask you for your final words here. Your closing argument, as it were.
If there's something greater that a film can provide over years as opposed to entertainment than anything else, it's probably relevance. How relevant does this film stay or speak or become more of as time goes on? And I think this is maybe the best example of a movie that was relevant when it happened, although not to as many people, and has gotten more and more relevant as time has gone on. Maybe based more on anything else than human nature, and just continuing in a pattern that we've been in for a long time. Humans by nature are confrontational. Humans by nature are determined to believe that what they are doing is right. And you have both ends of that displayed here. You have two different philosophical points of view that can be seen as the protagonist in this movie based on what you believe. It has enough entertainment value in terms of catchy one-liners, lots and lots of action on the back half to help establish what makes it a little bit different from your standard moral tale, or one of just trying to use some type of far out situation to further exemplify a current situation, much like, you referenced the 50s sci-fi movies. Most of them were in response to the communist threat, things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I Married a Communist, all those types of films. And it takes that, plays it a little straighter, even with the sci-fi angle. It looks a little grittier and dirtier, so it has a little bit more of a real feel to it. I think it takes a lot of what made those movies fun and what made those movies relevant for their time and updates it to not just the climate that it was made in, but the current climate that still exists today. And I think when a movie can offer that type of relevancy and still find a way to entertain a lot of people, it's always going to be something special.
All right. Well, I think then we're going to rest these proceedings, and we'll pass judgment here. And as per usual on trial, whatever side I'm taking wins. I think we're we're mostly in agreement where it's like the film's not perfect. It's a cult classic. It is a favorite among people who just enjoy this and don't think about it too deeply. But I think to ignore some of the structural issues, I don't think. Sorry. I think that if you're thinking about the movie, if you're talking about the movie the way we are, it's okay to point out the film is flawed. There are plenty of crowd-pleasing cult classic favorites that you can say they're not perfect, and it's okay to say that. But if anything, They Live gets by on its relevant, its thematic and cultural relevance than anything else. And so with that said, that is our review of They Live. I haven't done it on trial in a while. I sometimes forget some of the lingo I'm supposed to use to play up the courtroom stuff. But
point of parliamentary procedure.
Yes. So this past week, Jesse dropped a unspoken issues for the Resident Evil comics,
where they talk about a writ of habeas corpus.
We re-aired the Everyone Loves a Bad Guy Halloween special, where in the middle of them talking about their favorite Halloween movies, books, and television shows, Sean did a 40-minute rant about whatever was going on in the UFC at the time.
You could always end up listening to Talk to Kiki.
There you go. On Tuesday, we reviewed Pray for the Devil and discussed the long storied history of exorcisms. Last night, Ronnie Adams and I did a long road to ruin for all 3 Clerks movies, including the newest one. This weekend, we'll be re-airing our Damn You Hollywood for Avengers Age of Ultron. Jesse's dropping a Rise of the Black Panther review. We'll be doing our very first Metal Hammer of Doom Jukebox. Episode 1, we'll be looking at the most recent Slipknot album, since we didn't get a chance to do an actual review of it. Plus, we'll be looking at some videos. That's always going to be fun. Alexis Hano will be doing a review of House of the Dragon. We'll be doing election coverage here in place of Damn You Hollywood.
I'll put butts in the seats.
And then there'll be an Everyone Loves a Bad Guy for the Marvel Cinematic Universe Part 2. Part 1 was earlier this year when Doctor Strange came out, or Thor, whichever one. And now we're doing Part 2 and with Black Panther coming out. And then Alexa will be back again, and she'll be reviewing Cabinet of Curiosities. So that's it for the next week and a half and what happened this week. Pat, you got anything going on?
We have something going on fairly soon.
We do. I'll talk about that right now, as a matter of fact. So we're bringing back the boxing show that we did a little ways back. Oh, damn it. We had finished up. We did our heavyweight series, then we did our 4 Kings series, and then we said we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back with a brand new History of Boxing podcast, where we focus on a particular fight or series of fights between 2 particular individuals. So we'll be kicking things off in November, the end of November 28th, with the nut shots heard around the world. The great nutshot battle of the 1990s. Riddick Bowe versus Andrew Gallardo 1 and 2. An auspicious start, to say the least.
We wanted to hit the high notes, folks. And with that many low blows, everybody's hitting the high notes.
December 22nd, right before Christmas, we'll have Gavin Napier on to talk about one of his favorite fights ever. Diego Corrales versus Jose Luis Castillo. January 26th, we're looking at Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez. March 9th, Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Arguello. March 30th, all 4 Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez fights.
Not the coffee guy, Mark.
And then April 27th, the Barrera versus Morales trilogy. So that's what we got going on in the late 2022, early 2023 in the history of boxing. What do you think about that lineup, Pat?
I think there's not a single cartoon in the bunch.
Leave her alone. She does fine work.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Begins with a C and ends with a T.
Oh, well, I didn't say that.
Not this time, pal. All right. So since Pat has nothing else to to plug, check out our
RCUN. No. See you next Tuesday, everybody. We've lost Mark. They've censored him just like they're trying to censor you. But put the glasses on and you'll see what they're trying to do to you.